Every long road has a point where the world around you goes quiet, and you realize you're the only thing moving for miles. That's where the stories you're about to hear were born, on empty highways, forgotten exits, and stretches of blacktop where people swear something was watching them just beyond the headlights. Welcome to Verified Fears, where late-night drives, wrong turns, and ordinary trips home become the kind of memories that keep you checking your mirrors long after the engine is off. Tonight, stay with this video from the first mile to the last. And if you make it all the way through, prove it in the comments by telling which story made you rethink your next road trip. Because once you hear what others have lived through out there, you'll never look at a quiet highway the same way again. You ever driven a road so empty it feels like the world forgot to put anything on it except you and the trees? Up in northern Maine, there's a stretch of Route 2A that does that to you, even before anything wrong happens. They call it the Haynesville Woods. It's just blacktop and snow and dark, ragged trees pressing in so close to the shoulder that your high beams bounce straight back at you, like the road is swallowing its own light. Long-haul truckers know that name. They know the song, too, the one about a tombstone every mile. They joke about it on the radio to keep from thinking too hard. But when the weather turns and the road ices over, the jokes get quiet real fast. So let's make a deal right now, you and me. For the next few minutes, I'm in your passenger seat. You're driving this run with me. I want you to picture your hands on the wheel, the vibration through your palms, the rumble of a loaded trailer behind you. Hear that low diesel growl under everything I'm saying. Feel the heater barely keeping up, boots still stiff from salt and slush. Because when I tell you what I saw out there, I don't want you imagining some movie scene. I want you imagining the way your own chest would feel, trying to breathe around a winter jacket that's suddenly too tight. Years back, I picked up regular loads through the north. Potatoes, mostly. Night runs, so the truck stops would be quieter and the way stations easier. The first time the dispatcher told me I'd be taking Route 2A through Haynesville Woods in January, every old-timer in the break room gave me the same look, a little smirk, a little pity. One of them, Ray, said, "If you see her, don't hit the brakes, just keep going." Then he clapped my shoulder like he'd just told me the punchline to a joke. He never explained who her was. He didn't have to. The others were suddenly busy looking everywhere but at me. The night it happened. The weather was already bad when I left the last town behind. You know that feeling when the houses thin out, the last traffic light disappears in your mirrors, and the radio stations turn to nothing but static and faraway country songs? That's what it's like heading into Haynesville after midnight. The sky was just a dark ceiling pressed down on the trees, and the snow wasn't falling in big flakes. It was that fine, endless powder that looks like static in your headlights. The kind that hypnotizes you if you stare into it too long. I kept both hands on the wheel, fingers stiff in my gloves. The CB sputtered off and on, little bursts of chatter from other trucks somewhere out there, but not near me. I'd pass a reflective sign and then have whole minutes where the only thing breaking the black and white world outside was my own headlights. My mirrors showed nothing, just the trailer and the faint suggestion of trees. No houses, no driveways, no porch lights. Just that narrow ribbon of ice and the woods leaning over it. I remember checking the dash clock. It said 1:13 a.m. I remember that because I was thinking, another hour and I'm clear of this. I had that tired ache behind the eyes you get after too many miles. But I wasn't sleepy, just worn down. The kind of tired that makes you talk to yourself to fill the cab. I kept saying, easy, easy. every time the truck rolled over a patch that felt slicker than the rest. I was focused, alert. That's important. Because what I'm about to tell you, I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, trying to blame it on fatigue, on tricks of the light, on stories I'd heard. And it never quite fits. I saw her as I came out of a gentle right-hand curve. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, barely a smudge against the snowbank. Then my lights picked out the color of her coat. This washed-out blue, like something that had been through too many winters. She was standing on the shoulder, nowhere near a driveway or side road, one hand tight around herself, the other half raised like she couldn't decide if she was hitchhiking or just trying to wave someone down. Now, you picture it. You're me. You're in a 40-ton rig on black ice, and suddenly there's a small figure on the side of the road, in a place where even you wouldn't want to be broken down at night. You don't think ghost, you don't think legend, you think, if I hit a patch and slide, she's dead. I eased off the throttle, foot feathering the brake just enough to scrub a little speed without locking anything up. My heart was going. Not from fear of her, from fear of hurting her. As I got closer, details came into focus in that harsh, washed-out headlight glare. She couldn't have been more than late teens, early 20s. Dark hair stuck to her face, no hat, thin legs in tights, shoes that had no business being out on an icy shoulder. Her coat wasn't zipped all the way. She wasn't even looking at me. She was staring straight ahead down the line of the road, like she'd been standing there a long time just watching it vanish into the trees. I rolled by it maybe 35. That's crawling for a road like that, but it still felt too fast. And as my cab came level with her, she finally turned her head, not like a person reacting to an oncoming truck, more like someone slowly noticing a noise they've been hearing for a while. Her face was pale, but it was her eyes that froze me. They weren't wide with fear or relief. They just looked confused, lost, like she'd been walking through something only she could see, and my headlights had cut through it for a second. I kept going. What else could I do? There was no safe place to stop a rig right there. Any sudden break could have sent me sliding sideways. I watched for her in my mirror, intending to grab the radio and warn anyone behind me. But when I glanced back, I could only see the stretch I'd already passed. Snowbank, trees, empty shoulder, no blue coat, no girl, nothing. I told myself I'd misjudged the spot, that she was just out of range at that angle. You make those little bargains with yourself out there to keep your stomach from dropping. I gripped the wheel harder, leaned forward, eyes tracking the road. "You're fine," I muttered. "You're fine. Watch the ice." Maybe 5 minutes later, maybe less, maybe more. Time gets weird in that kind of focus. I saw her again. Same road, same conditions. Another gradual curve, this time to the left. And there she was up ahead, standing in almost the exact same posture, that same blue coat, the same tilt of the head. Only this time she was a little closer to the white line. My first thought, stupid as it sounds, was that I'd looped somehow. Missed a turn, covered the same stretch twice. I actually checked the GPS, though I knew damn well there were no exits, no side roads, nothing I could have taken wrong. The GPS showed me moving forward on a straight line. My mouth went dry. You know that cold feeling that starts in your chest and spreads out to your fingers? It hit me all at once. I told myself, it's another girl. Someone else. Blue coat, okay. They sell more than one jacket in Maine. Calm down. But my hands were already slick on the wheel. I eased off even more, hazard lights flashing this time, because if she stepped out, I needed every extra foot I could get to stop. I could feel the trailer push a little as I crossed a rough patch of road. The snow was coming down thicker, swirling in the lights like a living thing. The wipers thumped back and forth, actually squeaking over the glass, and in between swipes, she'd go hazy, then clear again. Same profile, same way of holding herself, like she was cold from the inside out, not just from the air. When I was almost on top of her, she did step forward. Not fully into the lane, just 1 foot over the white line, like she was testing whether or not she could. She finally looked right at me. This time her expression wasn't just confusion. There was something like recognition in it. Like she'd decided I was the one she'd been waiting for. I did what you would do. I tapped the brakes again, felt the ABS judder under my boot, and laid on the air horn. The sound ripped through the quiet, bouncing off the trees, huge and ugly and human. For 1 second, she was right there in the center of the beams, hair whipping in the wind of my approach, eyes locked on mine through the glass. And then the truck shuddered over a slick patch and my whole world lurched sideways. You ever feel 40 feet of trailer start to come around on you? The steering wheel goes light. The back end starts to slide. The noise changes. The rumble of the tires turns into this smoother, sickening hiss. I fought it on instinct, steering into the skid, feathering the brake, talking under my breath like that would help. Come on, come on, come on. The trees on my right looked too close, the center line too far. For a heartbeat, I was sure I was going into the ditch. And if I did, I was going to hit her. Except there was nothing to hit. When the truck finally straightened out and the world stopped trying to spin, my heart was banging so hard I could hear it over the engine. I coasted, hands shaking, and then eased the rig to a stop as gently as I could along the shoulder. The hazard lights ticked. The engine idled, loud and alive in the frozen silence. For a long moment, I just sat there with my forehead on the wheel, breath fogging the inside of the windshield, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Then I did the dumb thing, the brave thing. Depends how you look at it. I climbed down. The cold hit like a slap, so sharp it actually burned the inside of my nose. The road under my boots was hard-packed snow with a slick sheen of ice, the kind that makes that squeak crunch sound when you shift your weight. My breath came out in heavy plumes. The hazard lights flashed against the trees, orange, white, making the shadows jump. There was no other traffic, no headlights in either direction. Just miles of nothing and the outline of my own truck. I walked back along the side, eyes scanning the ditch, the trees, the lane. If I had clipped her, even just brushed her, she would have been somewhere right there. I kept expecting to see a dark shape crumpled against the snowbank. A dropped glove, footprints, anything. There was nothing. I stepped into the lane to look for tracks where she'd been standing. The snow was fresh here, a smooth, unbroken sheet, except for the twin black scars of my own tires and the places where the trailer had tried to slide. No footprints leading to the shoulder, no marks near the line. Just an empty patch of road where, seconds ago, I would have sworn on my license a girl in a blue coat had been staring me down. I stood there, turning slow circles, trying to make sense of it. And that's when I noticed the other tracks. Not human. Twin lines pressed into the snow along the edge of the ditch, like something had been pacing the side of the road, parallel to my path. Every few feet they cut closer to the shoulder, then back out again. They didn't look like deer. They didn't look like any tread I recognized. They just ended a few yards behind my trailer, as if whatever made them had stepped off the earth. The woods on either side of Route 2A feel different at night. You can't really see into them past the first ranks of trunks, just a wall of black. But you know they go on and on, those trees. You get the sense of being watched, not by one thing, but by the place itself. Standing there in the middle of the lane, I felt it. That pressure at the back of the neck. Like someone is standing just behind you about to speak. I don't mind telling you. I talked out loud to no one I could see. "If you're out there," I said, voice shaking in the cold, "I'm sorry. I can't help you. I'll get killed if I stay here." A gust of wind came down the road then, straight along the blacktop, sharp enough to make my eyes water. For a split second, the snow in front of me lifted in a swirl, and I saw the shape of a figure in it, just the hint of shoulders and a bowed head. My brain said, "Drift." My heart said otherwise. Either way, it moved past and dissolved into the dark, and I was left alone again with the flash of my hazards and the sound of my own breathing. I got back in the cab and shut the door harder than I meant to. The interior light flicked on and off, leaving me in that orange glow for a moment before it snapped back to darkness, just the dash and the faint glow of the gauges. My gloves left wet marks on the wheel. I sat there until my hands stopped shaking enough to feel like I could drive. Before I pulled out, I glanced at the digital clock again. It still said 1:13 a.m. Now, I know what you're thinking. Clocks glitch. People misremember. Time stretches in fear. I told myself all of that on the rest of the run. I got through the woods, hit safer roads, found a truck stop, and told no one. What was I supposed to say? I almost wrecked my rig to avoid a girl who wasn't there, and time didn't move for 10 minutes. You keep that to yourself if you want anyone to trust you behind a wheel. But the road has a way of comparing notes for you. Months later, I was back in the same break room. Different load, different route. Ray was there again, the old-timer who told me not to hit the brakes. We got to talking about bad winter roads, and someone brought up Haynesville Woods. A couple of guys rolled their eyes, smirked. Ray didn't. He just watched me over his coffee and said, "Did you see her?" I didn't answer right away. He didn't wait for me to. He said, "Blue coat? Looks like she hasn't decided if she wants help or not. If you see her once, you'll see her twice. If you stop, you might see her for longer." I asked him, quiet, if he'd ever stopped. He looked away toward the vending machines. "No," he said. But I climbed down, checked the ditch, no tracks. Clock on the dash still read the same when I got back in. That was hell, 20 years ago now. Then he looked back at me, eyes tired. That road's got more dead on it than most little towns. Some of them don't know they're dead yet. That's the problem. Since then, I've run that stretch a few more times. You don't always get to pick your routes in this business. I go through in daylight if I can. If I can't, I keep my eyes straight ahead, hands steady, and I don't slow down for anything that isn't another rig or blue flashing lights. Sometimes, though, on the worst nights, when the snow goes sideways and the woods close in, I get this feeling. Like there's someone walking along the shoulder just outside the cone of my headlights, matching my speed. Like any second, if I look just a little to the right, I'll see that blue coat again, arm half raised, eyes empty, and asking, "If you ever find yourself up there, on that stretch of Route 2A after midnight, and your radio goes quiet and the world narrows down to your beams and the trees, remember what you and I just drove through together. If you see a girl in a thin coat standing on the side of the road, out where no one should be, think about the ice under your tires, the weight behind you, and the stories that road collects, never lets go. You can decide whether you believe any of this when you're safely home. But in that moment, with your hands sweating on the wheel and the woods staring back, you'll understand why some of us will do anything, not to be the next voice she turns her head toward. You ever notice how some roads feel wrong before anything actually happens? Like the air changes, the sky gets heavier, and even the dashboard lights seem too bright. That's how it feels on the old Devil's Highway, what the signs now call US 491, but everyone out there still calls Route 66 under their breath. If you and I were sitting together right now in a parked car with the engine ticking as it cooled, I'd tell you this the way I told it to my brother. Slowly, carefully, because once you hear it, you'll think twice before ever taking an unfamiliar exit in the desert again. I was driving south alone that night, running from more than one thing. Officially, it was just a long, late drive from Colorado down toward Gallup, trying to make up time after a storm delay. Unofficially, let's just say life was a mess. And a few hundred miles of empty highway sounded easier than sitting in a quiet apartment with my thoughts. The stretch of 491 that used to be 6 cuts through Navajo land and desert that looks endless even in daylight. At night, it's just you, the asphalt, and whatever your headlights decide to reveal. You've driven lonely roads before. Imagine that. Then strip away the comfort of trees, houses, and other cars until it's just black space pressing on the windows. The first weird thing was the sky. Out there, away from town glow, the stars are sharp enough to hurt your eyes if you look straight up. But that night, it was like a dark lid had come down over everything. No moon, no stars, just a deep, dull, brown-black horizon with a faint smear of storm in the distance. My radio scanned through static, snatching half-second fragments of Spanish, old country songs and preachers talking about sin and judgment. I let it cycle because the silence in between felt worse. My phone showed no service. The dash clock said 2:27 a.m. and felt like it had been saying 2:27 for a very long time. You know when you've been driving for hours and you start counting mile markers just to prove to yourself you're actually moving? I'd been doing that. Green signs popping up in the beams, numbers ticking down, tiny proofs that I was getting closer to somewhere. Then, just past a faded sign that warned of open range next 20 miles, I saw the old shield. Not the new 491, but an older, sun-faded rectangle bolted to a secondary post at the edge of the right shoulder, 666. Someone had spray-painted horns and a tail on the numbers years ago, and sun and sand had eaten most of it away. But it was still there, leaning like it was too tired to stand up straight. If you know the reputation of that number on that road, you feel it in your stomach the second you see it. Stories of phantom trucks, demon dogs, cars forced off the highway by lights that come out of nowhere. Those legends ride shotgun with you, whether you believe in them or not. I remember laughing under my breath, telling myself, well, congratulations, you've officially entered the cliché. Then, because I was tired and because people do stupid things when they're alone at night, I said out loud, if there's anything out here, you picked the wrong night. I'm not in the mood. That's when the GPS glitched. 1 second it showed the familiar straight line south, little blue arrow crawling along. The next, the road vanished from the display, leaving my arrow floating over a beige void. No roads, no side streets, no labels, just a tiny message at the top. Recalculating? It stayed that way, stuck, like the device had forgotten that this stretch of pavement existed. Out the windshield, the asphalt looked the same. Double yellow, cracked white lines at the edge, reflectors popping up rhythmically. But in that moment, it felt like I'd slid sideways off the map into some duplicate road that paralleled the real one. I told myself it was nothing. Electronics glitch all the time. I tapped the side of the unit, reset it. When it came back, it only showed my car icon in the center of a blank screen, coordinates ticking at the bottom like a heart monitor. No road at all, just numbers. A few minutes later, I saw the exit. The Devil's Highway doesn't have a lot of options out there. Long runs of nothing, then an exit sign for a reservation road or a tiny town with a name you've never heard and might never see again. This one was different. It didn't have a number. Just a small green board with peeling white letters. Services. No town name, no distance. An arrow bent to the right. The actual off-ramp looked rougher than the main highway, less traveled. The kind of exit you debate. Do you take it and hope for gas? Or stay on the main line and trust there's something better ahead? I checked my gauge. Less than a quarter tank. Not panic level, but low enough that a misjudgment could become a problem. In your place, what would you have done? Probably the same thing I did. I told myself there'd be some old gas station with flickering lights and questionable coffee, maybe a tiny motel. I signaled, drifted over, and followed the curve of the ramp down into the dark. The second my tires left the main lane, the sound changed. You know the hum tires make on well-traveled asphalt, that steady white noise. This was rougher, grittier, like the surface had been patched too many times and given up. My headlights picked out scrub and low brush on either side, but no signs of buildings, no sodium vapor glow on the horizon. Just a narrow two-lane that arced away from the highway and dipped into a shallow basin between low, shadowy rises. For a few minutes, nothing happened. I followed the road as it curved and straightened, waiting to see the washed-out rectangles of old billboards or the dark shapes of parked semis. The radio slipped fully into static, a gentle hiss that seemed to swell and fade in sync with my own breathing. I realized my hands were tighter on the wheel than they needed to be. The fuel gauge hadn't moved, but I kept glancing at it like it might decide to free fall. Then my rearview mirror caught something. Far behind me, just at the edge of what the mirror could show, a pair of headlights crested the ramp and floated down after me. For a moment, I felt relief. Another car meant I wasn't out here alone on some forgotten spur road. The lights looked low and wide, truck or big pickup, I guessed. I relaxed a little, told myself I'd follow whatever gas station glow they seemed headed for. Except they closed the distance too fast. You know the way headlights look when someone is really moving? How they don't just grow larger, but seem to jump forward in chunks, eating the space between you. One second those lights were a distant twin star. The next, they were distinct circles. And a few breaths after that, they were bright enough I had to flip my mirror to night mode. I checked my speed. 60. Not slow. Not out here. Whoever was behind me had to be doing 80, maybe more, on a narrow, unlit side road that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in years. I edged over as far as I dared without dropping a wheel off into the dirt, waiting for them to blast past in some fit of highway aggression. They didn't. They tucked in behind me instead, close enough that I couldn't see the vehicle anymore, only the glare washing through my back window. No shape, no grille, no cab. Just light. I couldn't even tell how high off the ground it was. Every time I glanced back, all I got was a wall of white that made my eyes water. I told myself, okay, they just want you to hurry up. I nudged my speed up a little, but the road wasn't straight. It rolled gently, dipped, curled between low hills that looked higher than they probably were in the darkness. There were no mile markers, no intersecting roads, nothing but that one strip of asphalt. My palms started to sweat. The steering wheel felt slick. In that cramped cocoon of headlights ahead and flood of light behind, it was easy to forget there was a whole desert beyond the tunnel. After a while, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, I couldn't tell. You start to notice the way an engine sounds. My little car had its usual hum and rattle. But under it, or maybe around it, there was another sound. A deeper rumble that didn't change when I accelerated or slowed a little. I realized it wasn't my engine. It was theirs. Whoever was behind me had something big. Something with a low, constant growl that you feel in your chest more than in your ears. The sound you hear when a semi passes on the interstate and your own windows vibrate. Except they didn't pass. I thought about pulling over, letting them go by. But every time I glanced at the shoulder, there was nothing but loose gravel and a drop into scrub that I couldn't gauge. No guardrails, no widened pullouts. The edge of the road just fell away into black. You can picture it. Your hands warm and shaky on the wheel, your jaw tight, trying to decide if you trust that sliver of dirt at 60 miles an hour with anonymous headlights almost touching your bumper. The first real shot of fear hit me when I checked the rear view and realized I could see nothing. Not even the vague hint of a vehicle silhouette. Only light, perfectly centered, as if it had no source. My brain didn't like that. It kept trying to fill in a grill, a hood, a windshield. But no matter how I shifted in my seat or angled the mirror, the same result. Blinding white gold beams with nothing behind them. Okay, I said out loud, voice much smaller than I wanted it to be. Okay, I get it. You're fast. You're there. Go around. I flicked my turn signal and hugged the right as tightly as I could, tires scrubbing the painted line. The lights behind me swayed a little, like the driver had drifted left, then jerked back into alignment. They weren't going around. They were staying exactly where they were, exactly as close as they wanted to be. Heat crawled up my neck. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I tapped my brakes. Not enough to slow dramatically, just enough to flash my brake lights, a polite, back off. The instant the red lit up, the roar behind me changed. It surged, not volume exactly, more like presence. The low rumble rose in pitch, a sudden, angry snarl of machinery straining. The lights flared even brighter, bleaching out the interior of my car like someone had just opened the sun behind me. I flinched, my foot slipping, the car wobbling toward the center line. Adrenaline dumped into my veins so hard my hands went numb for a second. I swore, dragged the car back, lungs locked. That was when the road simply ended. Not physically, obviously. I didn't hit a barricade or a cliff. But the comforting illusion that I was on a known, charted piece of infrastructure vanished for good. Ahead, my headlights washed over a green reflective sign. I squinted to read it as it rushed past. Services, 1 mile. That didn't make sense. I'd already come off for services. There couldn't be another exit this soon, not branching off this nothing road. The asphalt under my wheels felt different too, a faint vibration like driving over an old bridge. Though I saw no railings, no water below. The GPS, still stubbornly refusing to acknowledge any road at all, had my little arrow sliding backward. The coordinates were changing in the wrong direction, as if I were retracing my path while still very much moving forward. It made my skin crawl. Reality shouldn't be allowed to misbehave in little ways like that. When it does, you feel how flimsy your trust in the world actually is. I made a decision then. It wasn't a smart one. It wasn't a safe one. It was a desperate, human one. At the next rise, where the road looked marginally straighter and I could see far enough ahead to know there were no oncoming headlights, I slammed my foot down and shot forward. The engine whined in protest. The speedometer climbed, the landscape blurred. I thought, irrationally, that maybe if I just broke away hard enough, I'd outrun whoever was back there. Behind me, the sound went from a growl to a roar to something that didn't sound entirely mechanical anymore. It had a texture to it, a layered quality like multiple engines revving slightly out of sync. The lights stayed locked to my rear, not losing ground, not gaining, holding that same unbearable distance. 70. 75. 80. My car was not built for that kind of speed on a road like this. Every bump sent a thread up through the chassis. If there had been a deer, a cow, a washed-out patch, anything, I'd have been done. And yet, in that moment, what scared me more than dying in a stupid, preventable single-car accident was slowing down and letting whoever or whatever was on my bumper decide what happened next. The climax came quietly, almost anticlimactically, which somehow made it worse. After what felt like hours of that chase locked in place, there was a curve ahead with a cluster of reflectors that looked different from the others. They formed a kind of square shape, floating in the dark. As I got closer, color seeped in. Red, white, blue, yellow. The shape resolved into signs, lit canopies, parked trucks. I was looking at a big, modern truck stop. Rows of diesel pumps, a lit-up convenience store, even a fast food logo I recognized. A full, busy oasis that could have been dropped in from any typical interstate. I almost cried from relief. The transition was that sudden. One breath I was on a narrow, nameless spur being hunted by a wall of light. The next I was blinking at the glow of fluorescent tubes and the silhouettes of 18-wheelers. I checked my mirror to see if my pursuer was going to follow me into the lot. There was nothing there. No lights, no truck, no glow on the horizon. The road behind me was just bare asphalt stretching into darkness, as mundane and harmless as if it had always been. My own taillights were the only color in that direction. My body kept braced for impact anyway, shoulders hunched, waiting for a last-second horn blast, a surge. Anything. It never came. Inside the truck stop, the sounds were normal. Doors slamming, people laughing too loud on too much caffeine, a TV droning about sports I didn't follow. My legs felt rubbery as I walked to the restroom. When I caught sight of myself in the mirror over the sink, I barely recognized my own face. Pale, eyes wide, a smear of sweat drying along my hairline. On my way back out, I passed a bulletin board cluttered with flyers. Lost dogs, trucks for sale, insurance notices. One photocopied sheet caught my eye. It was about staying alert on 491, Old 6, with a list of safety tips and a little paragraph mentioning high rates of fatigue-related incidents and strange nighttime hazards. The last line said, "If you feel like you're being pushed faster than you're comfortable driving, trust your instincts and get off the road safely." I asked the cashier, half joking, if anyone still talked about weird stuff on the old Devil's Highway. Her smile went flat in an instant. "People still drive stupid out there," she said. "Blame the number, blame a curse, blame ghosts, doesn't matter. Road takes what it takes." Then, after a beat, she added, "We get folks in here sometimes saying a truck chased them in. Always late, always from that same direction. Funny thing is, I'm looking right at the cameras right now." She gestured at the monitor behind her. "And yours is the only car that pulled in for the last 20 minutes. That was enough for me. You can call it an overactive imagination. You can chalk it up to exhaustion, stress, the power of stories you've heard about a haunted highway that had its number changed, but not its reputation. But if you ever find yourself rolling south on 491 in the dead hours, past one of those old, half-rotten Route 6 signs, and you see an unmarked exit for services with no town name, remember this conversation. Remember the feeling of those headlights clawing up your spine. And if a pair of lights comes flying up behind you and refuses to pass, no matter how much space you give it, no matter how fast you go, ask yourself one question. Do you really want to find out who's driving? You know how people always say, if you break down on a lonely highway, someone will stop and help. Out on I-75, across the Everglades, that long, flat stretch they call Alligator Alley. That sentence has a different ending. Out there, people talk about bodies turning up in the canals, skeletons in the sawgrass, work crews finding what's left of a person where the buzzards already started the cleanup. So when my cousin called me from that road years ago, voice shaking over the hum of passing semis, I heard every one of those stories crowd into the silence between his words. I'm telling you this the way he told it to me later. Sitting at my kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world. For this one, imagine you're not driving. You're the one whose phone might ring. The person someone calls when they're stranded and scared, but trying not to sound like it. Feel that mix of worry and annoyance at first. That's exactly how it started. He'd been heading west across Alligator Alley late, trying to make it from Fort Lauderdale toward Naples in one shot. If you've never driven it, it's basically an 80-mile ribbon of highway raised above swamp and black water. Fenced now, but still surrounded by nothing but sawgrass, canals, and whatever decides to crawl or swim through them. No exits you'd actually want to take at night. No real shoulder, just a narrow strip and then steep drops into darkness. The kind of place where, if your engine dies, you're painfully aware of how thin the barrier is between you and a lot of teeth. His car started acting up halfway across. At first, it was just a stutter when he'd try to pass, like the engine was holding its breath. Then the battery light flickered. Gauges dipped, headlights dimmed for half a second, then came back. You know that creeping dread when a machine you rely on starts misbehaving in the middle of nowhere? He felt it rising up the back of his neck, but there was nowhere to get off, nowhere to limp into. Just mile markers ticking by and those tall black fences meant to keep gators and people from wandering where they shouldn't. Eventually, the inevitable happened. The radio cut out mid-song, the dash went dark, and the engine lost power. He managed to coax the car onto the narrow shoulder before it completely died, momentum carrying him just enough to straighten out. Suddenly, everything was quiet except for the faint hiss of the Everglades at night. Insects, distant frogs, the slow lap of water in the canal beyond the guardrail. He could see outlines of those giant drainage ditches on either side, the kind that have pulled more than one wrecked car down, never to be seen again. When he called me, he tried to make a joke. "Hey, if I go missing, tell people not to look in the water," he said. "They'll only find what the gators didn't want." But underneath the laugh, I heard real fear. No streetlights, no buildings, just his hazard lights clicking like a metronome for panic, reflecting off the white line in the fence. Every few seconds, another car or 18-wheeler screamed past in the left lane, buffeting his little sedan hard enough that it rocked on its suspension. We went through the usual checklist together. Try the ignition. Nothing. Lights? Barely. Any warning lights before it died? He explained, voice getting thinner, how everything had flickered like a haunted house before blowing out. I told him to call roadside assistance and the state troopers. He already had. They said it could be 45 minutes, he said. Maybe more. They're busy. There was something with a body earlier today by the alley. I heard it on the radio before it cut. That's the kind of sentence that sits in your gut like a stone. While he waited, he stayed on the phone with me. We both pretended it was casual, but you know that clingy silence that comes when you're just listening to someone breathe and trying to think of anything normal to say? That. He kept describing what he saw out the windshield. Like narrating the darkness would make it less big. Long, straight lines of reflectors disappearing ahead. The flash of eyes in the grass occasionally when his hazards pulsed. Probably gators, maybe raccoons. But out there it all looks wrong. The smell of hot metal cooling and that weird, swampy, earthy rot you get in low water under Florida heat even after sundown. After about 15 minutes, he said, there's a van. His voice changed on that word. It went tighter, more precise, like he wanted me to really hear him. White panel van, he said. No windows on the side. It just went by slow. That caught my attention. Nobody goes slow on Alligator Alley unless they're rubbernecking a wreck or looking for something. He described it. Older model, plain, no company logo. Paint a dull, dirty white. It had been in the right lane, which was already weird, easing past his stalled car at maybe 30 miles an hour while everything else roared through the left. The driver turned his head and looked right at me, my cousin said. Didn't smile, didn't wave, just stared. The van drifted on, tail lights shrinking into the distance. We both relaxed a little. Maybe it was just some cautious driver who didn't want to get too close. That could still be normal. 5 minutes later, he said, it's back. This time it came from the other direction. Eastbound. Same van, same flat, dirty white sides, same lack of markings. It slowed as it drew even with his car again. He's looking at me, my cousin whispered into the phone. I could hear his breath hitched shallow in the speaker. It's the same guy. I'm sure. And here's the part that made my skin crawl in my own well-lit kitchen miles away. He swore the driver's face was exactly the same angle, the same expression as the first time, down to the little purse of his lips, like someone had paused and unpaused a video. The van continued on, disappeared into black. We tried to talk about other things, sports, his job, anything to drag his attention away. But every swish of passing headlights made him flinch. You know how you can hear when someone keeps looking over their shoulder, even if you can't see them? His sentences kept breaking off mid-thought. I could picture him, alone in that car with the engine dead, phone a small rectangle of safety light, every pair of headlights, a potential problem, and a potential rescue at the same time. The third pass broke him. He saw it first in the side mirror this time. Twin headlights in the distance, low and close together, coming up fast in the right lane. No, 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 he muttered. He didn't even need to tell me what it was. I could hear it in the way he said it. The van slowed as it neared, as if pacing itself perfectly to come alongside his dead car and stay there. You know that awful suspended second when another vehicle hangs right beside you on the highway, just in your peripheral vision, and for some reason, neither of you pulls ahead or drops back. That's what he described. The van crawled even with him, and then matched his non-speed, engine idling so quietly he could barely hear it over the whine of nearby trucks. He didn't want to look, but he did. Everyone does. The driver was closer this time, maybe 6 feet away through 2 panes of glass. Middle-aged guy, pale, sallow skin, thin beard that looked more like neglect than style. Baseball cap shadowing his eyes just enough that you couldn't get a clean read, but my cousin said something was off. Not wild or obviously threatening. Just wrong in that subtle way that makes your animal brain start backing toward the door. The man lifted one hand. For a heartbeat, my cousin thought he was going to offer a "you okay" gesture. He didn't. He mimed turning a steering wheel, slowly, deliberately. 2 hands, as if gripping an invisible wheel, twisting it first left, then right, like someone playing a child's game of pretending to drive. Then he pointed, not at my cousin, not at the car, but at the guardrail and the dark water beyond it. Point, twist, point, twist. His mouth curled into the smallest possible smile. Just a hint at the edge. Then he faced forward again and eased the van ahead a few yards, still in the right lane. That was when the work crew truck appeared. From the east, a big state vehicle with yellow lights on top came barreling down the right lane, clearly expecting no one to be there. The lane was supposed to be clear, near a stalled car. My cousin saw the glare of the bar light flare over the van's roof and shouted into the phone, "He's gonna hit!" But the van reacted with impossible precision. No brake lights, no swerve. One moment it was there, eating up pavement. The next, it just wasn't. The crew truck roared past my cousin's car alone, buffeting it with a gust of displaced air, its driver probably cursing every idiot who parks too close to the lane. The phone crackled with our mutual breathing. "It's gone," he said hoarsely. "You saw it?" Of course I hadn't. All I had were his words, and the thin, tinny sound of his heart trying to punch through his ribs. When the trooper finally arrived, a good half-hour later, my cousin kept it simple. Car died, been waiting. Yeah, saw a suspicious van, might want to keep an eye out. The trooper nodded like he'd heard that 1,000 times, helped him with a jump, then insisted on following him to the next exit to make sure the car didn't die again. At the gas station, my cousin screwed up the courage to ask, trying to sound casual, if anyone had trouble with creepy vans along the alley. The trooper's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced away, then back. "We get all kinds out here," he said. "Folks dump stolen cars in the canals. Folks dump other things." He hesitated. Couple of cases, years apart. We had cars found abandoned on the shoulder, doors open, personal stuff still inside. No driver. Tow lists them. We run the plates. Turns out they belong to people who were later found. Let's just say they didn't walk away on their own power. My cousin asked if a white van was ever involved. The trooper gave him a long, measuring look. "You heard that on the news?" he asked. My cousin shook his head. Said no, he just wondered. The trooper didn't answer. He just lifted his coffee, turned, and walked back out into the Florida heat. That non-answer sits heavier than any confirmation would have. Since that night, my cousin will drive hours out of his way to avoid that stretch. He'll stay on US 41, the slower Tamiami Trail, before he'll take the alley alone in the dark again. And knowing what I know now, I can't blame him. You and I both understand the ordinary danger of a desolate highway, drunk drivers, blowouts, drowsy mistakes. But there's another kind. The human predator who learns that remote stretches make good dumping grounds and that people on the side of the road are already halfway helpless. So if you ever find yourself crawling along Alligator Alley after midnight, check your fuel before you commit. Listen to the way the darkness presses against the windows. And if your engine stutters and dies and a plain white van passes you once, and then twice from the other direction, and then slows down to sit beside you like it has all the time in the world, remember this voice in your ear. Remember that little pantomime of hands on an invisible wheel, turning you gently toward the guardrail and the black water beyond. Then ask yourself, quickly and honestly, is help really what that driver has in mind? You ever notice how different the dark feels when there's water under you? Not a big open lake with moonlight on it. Just a narrow black ribbon under a bridge, too deep to see the bottom. That's the kind of dark I'm talking about. That's the dark on Clinton Road in New Jersey, up near a spot people call Dead Man's Curve, where locals tell you not to stop on the bridge, and definitely not to throw anything into the brook below. For this one, imagine it's just you and me in a parked car after midnight, engine ticking, and I'm leaning a little closer than comfortable when I say, we didn't listen. There were 4 of us that night. We weren't kids. We were old enough to know better, which somehow makes what we did feel dumber in hindsight. You know that bored, cocky mood you get on a back road with friends, windows fogging a little, everyone trying to one-up each other's stories? That's where this started. Somebody brought up Clinton Road. Most haunted in America, ghost boy under the bridge, coins that come back. We laughed, said all the usual stuff about urban legends and how it's just people scaring themselves in the dark. But the laughter got quiet when the GPS map shrank down to a single winding line, and the trees outside turned into a wall. Clinton Road doesn't look like much at first. Just a narrow, poorly lit strip of asphalt cutting through thick, old woods. No houses. No shoulder worth mentioning. The kind of place where your headlights disappear a few feet ahead, and everything beyond that is pure guesswork. As we drove, the air inside the car felt heavier, even with the vents on. The further we went, the less we talked. You could hear every little sound, the hum of the tires, the faint rattle in the door panel, the occasional snap of something in the woods when the beams brushed past. When we reached the bridge, we knew it without needing a sign. The road bent in a tight, mean little curve, and the guardrail gave way to a low stone wall. On the right side, through the gaps, there was just nothing. Blackness where the brook ran under us, the water hidden but loud in the quiet, a low rushing that you felt as much as heard. Somebody killed the radio without asking. It felt wrong to have music playing there. We parked halfway across, hazards off, lights low. For a second, none of us moved. The air coming in through the cracked windows was colder than it should have been for that time of year, like it had been sitting down in the gully for 100 years, soaking up every whispered dare and bad decision. My friend in the back, Mark, finally broke the silence. "So," he said, voice too loud in the small space, "who's got change?" You know how quickly bravado can turn into peer pressure? We all fumbled in pockets. I came up with a quarter, warm from my hand. Mark said the legend right away, half mocking, "If you toss a coin into the water at midnight, the ghost boy who drowned there will throw it back. He just doesn't like being tipped," he added. We checked the time. 12:04. Close enough, we decided, because fear and arrogance like to meet in the middle. Stepping out of the car was like stepping into another room of the same nightmare. The darkness on the roadside felt open compared to the tight, clawing dark on the waterside. The pavement under my shoes was rough and slightly damp. No other headlights, no other engines, just us, our breathing, and that constant rush of the brook below. We walked to the center of the bridge, stood over the low wall, and peered down. You couldn't see the water, just the hint of movement where the weak light bled off the stone and vanished into the pit. The smell coming up was cold and earthy. Not rot exactly, but the kind of wet stone smell that makes you think of basements and places things are kept that no one wants to look at. My skin prickled. I balanced the quarter on my thumb. "Make a wish," one of the others said, but their voice didn't sound like they expected an answer. I didn't wish for anything. I just flicked the coin out into the dark and listened. You know that tiny, sharp sound a coin makes when it hits water in a sink? This wasn't that. It was a duller plop, swallowed almost instantly by the brook's rush. For a second, we all stood still, straining to hear anything over our own hearts. Someone exhaled a shaky laugh. "Told you," they started. That's when the first coin hit the bridge. It was subtle. A little metallic tick behind us, on the asphalt, like somebody had dropped change getting out of a car. We all flinched and turned. There, about a foot from my sneaker, lay a quarter. Not rolling, not spinning. Just resting flat on the damp surface like it had been there all along, only we knew it hadn't. It was too clean, too shiny in the weak light. "Wind," Mark said immediately, even though there was no breeze. "You tossed shallow, it bounced." He said it fast, like he needed the explanation out before we could think too hard. But he was already moving toward it, and that was when I noticed his other hand. It was wet. Not sweaty, wet. Dripping. Little trails of water glistening down from his fingers, darkening the fabric of his sleeve. "Did you touch the wall?" I asked. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. He frowned, looked down at his hand, like he was seeing it for the first time. "No," he said. Something else clinked. This time it came from the hood of the car, a sharper sound, coin on metal with nothing soft to muffle it. We all jumped. All at once, we weren't brave kids on a dare anymore. We were animals who'd heard something land too close. We moved together toward the bridge entrance, instincts overriding jokes. Another quarter lay on the hood, perfect center, as if someone had placed it there with care. None of us had thrown that. The air thickened. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Picture yourself there. 3 friends close enough to touch, all pretending they're about to laugh, but no one actually making a sound. The night around you listening. The brook below you rushing like it's trying to cover its own secrets. Mark did the dumb thing. "Okay, kid," he said, a little too loudly, lifting his wet hand as if in greeting toward the dark over the water. "You got us. Cool trick. We're going." The way his breath steamed when he spoke made it look like the words were trying to escape his mouth faster than his brain wanted. The third sound wasn't a coin. It was a splash. Directly below where we'd been leaning, like something small and heavy had just broken the surface at high speed. The brook noise hiccuped around it, then sped back up. But the echo of that impact seemed to hang in the air. All 4 of us leaned forward without meaning to, eyes straining at the gap between stones. I could have sworn, for half a second, I saw a pale shape just under the surface. An oval, maybe a face, features blurred by flowing water. And then the dark closed over it again. "Back in the car," I said. No one argued. Doors slammed too loud in the stillness. The cabin felt cramped and suddenly unsafe, like we'd just invited something in with us. My hands shook as I fumbled the keys. The engine fought me, whining before it caught. Headlights flared against the trees. For a moment, nothing moved. Then we all heard it at once. The faintest patter on the rear windshield, like wet fingertips tapping from the outside. When we finally pulled away, hearts hammering, nobody talked. The coins stayed where they were, the one on the bridge, the one on the hood, until the car rolled and they slid out of sight. It wasn't until we were back on a more populated road, traffic lights and gas stations appearing like lifelines, that anyone dared break the silence. Mark cleared his throat. I didn't tell you guys something," he said. "When you were looking at the quarter on the ground, I leaned over the wall, just for a second, to see if anything, I didn't slip. Nobody pushed me. But it felt like two cold hands on mine, under the rail. Little hands. And then, when I jerked back, I realized my fingers were already wet." He turned his palm up. Even dry now, there were faint, wrinkled marks on the skin, like he'd been in a bath too long, or holding on to something underwater. Clinton Road has a reputation that goes way beyond one dead boy and a bridge. They talk about phantom headlights, ghost trucks, strange figures in the trees. Maybe all of that is just the woods messing with people's imaginations. But if you ever find yourself out there, tires humming over that lonely stretch, and somebody in the car suggests stopping at the bridge to see if the ghost will give you your money back, think about how it would feel to have invisible, freezing fingers wrap around yours from below. Think about hearing a coin you just threw into black waterland, perfectly dry, right beside your shoe. Then decide if a story is really worth something reaching up from the dark to answer you. You ever notice how some places make you start explaining yourself out loud, even when there's no one else in the car? That's what the Blue Ridge Parkway did to me that night. I kept telling the empty passenger seat, "I'm fine, it's just fog." Like I could talk over what my eyes were actually seeing. Two thin yellow lines vanishing into a wall of white that my headlights couldn't cut through. For this one, don't imagine you're hearing a story years later. Imagine you're in the driver's seat with me, fingers slipping a little on the wheel. I'd taken a late detour, chasing some idea about seeing the mountains by moonlight. Instead, the clouds dropped right onto the road. One minute there were distant ridgelines and stars. The next I was driving inside a cloud, speedometer down to 15, every curve a guess. High beams only made it worse. The light bounced back in my face, turning the world into a glowing white blur. So I crept along on low beams, eyes locked on the faint ghost of the center line. Because on the parkway, there isn't always an outside fog line to save you if you drift. It got quiet in that way that makes your ears ring. No crickets, no wind. Just the soft hiss of the tires through damp leaves on the pavement and the steady tick of the engine. When I passed an overlook, I only knew because the trees fell away on my right and the void opened up where the drop was. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The way the air changed temperature and texture, thinner and colder, like the night was breathing up from the valley. I told myself I'd pull off at the next overlook and wait it out. When the little brown sign finally appeared, half swallowed by fog, I practically sagged with relief. The pull-off was just a loop of asphalt hanging above nothing, ringed by a low stone wall. I killed the engine, left the parking lights on, and sat there listening to the ticking metal and my own breathing. The fog pressed right up against the glass, thick enough that even with the lights on, I couldn't see more than a few feet past the hood. That's when I saw the back seat, not in the mirror, in the window. You know how glass turns into a mirror in the dark? I glanced at the side window and saw my own outline, faint and pale. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was another shape behind mine, in the rear of the car, slightly darker than the rest of the interior, like a person sitting very still, just far enough back that the dome light wouldn't catch their face. My body reacted before my brain did. Every muscle went rigid. I didn't turn around. Somehow, I knew not to. Instead, I watched the reflection, my own shoulders tense, the headrest, and that other smudge where no one should be. As I stared, the fog outside the car seemed to pulse, almost like it was syncing with my heartbeat. In one pulse, the reflected shape in the back seat leaned forward a fraction, as if resting its elbows on its knees. In the next, I saw the vaguest suggestion of eyes in the glass, too high and too wide for where a normal face should have been. I did the smallest thing I could to test reality. I reached back with one hand without looking, fingers groping for the rear seat. Cloth, empty, no one. But in the window in front of me, the dark shape didn't move away. If anything, it edged closer to the glass, until I could make out what looked like the curve of a grin where a mouth might be, wide and wrong, stretching into the blur of my own reflection. Something cold brushed the back of my neck then. Not a draft, the air was dead still, but a distinct pressure, like the lightest touch of knuckles dragging from my hairline down to my collar. I flinched forward, breath punching out of me in a sound that didn't feel like it belonged to an adult. The reflection jerked too, but not the way I did. It seemed to tilt its head, curious, amused. I don't remember making the decision to leave. 1 second I was frozen. The next, the engine was roaring back to life, and my foot was jamming the car into gear. Gravel spat under the tires as I lurched out of the overlook, back onto the invisible road. The fog swallowed everything except the weak pool of light in front of me, and the faint, blurred glow of the gauges. I drove too fast for the conditions, and too slow for the fear, heart pounding, every nerve screaming at me not to look in the mirror. Eventually, the cloud thinned. The world came back in layers. First the vague shapes of trees, then the slick shine of the guardrail. Then, far off, the comfortingly ordinary taillights of another car. When I finally dared a glance into the rear view, the back seat was exactly as boring and empty as it should have been. I avoided that stretch of the parkway for a long time after. When I finally went back in daylight, I stopped at what I'm pretty sure was the same overlook. Blue sky, families taking pictures, valleys stretching out in every direction. Nothing sinister at all. Except, standing there in the sun, I realized something that made my skin crawl all over again. From the spot where I'd parked that night, with the car pointed back toward the road, there was nothing behind me but open air and 100 feet of drop. No trees, no hill, nothing for a shadow to be standing in when it leaned close enough to fog the glass beside my face. So if you ever find yourself up there on a foggy night, alone on that narrow strip of pavement in the clouds, and you pull off at an overlook to wait it out, pay attention to the reflections in your windows. If you see more than your own tired eyes looking back. If something in the blur of glass seems a little too patient, a little too amused, keep your hands on the wheel and your gaze forward. Some rides in the mountains are meant to be shared. Others will take any excuse to sit behind you and see where you're headed next. You ever have a memory that feels more like missing time than something you lived through? Like you can see the start and the end, but the middle refuses to line up. That's what Highway 1 did to me. And if you've ever driven the Pacific Coast Highway at night, no tourists, no cameras, just the ocean and a strip of asphalt stapled to a cliff, you'll understand why I'm still not sure which parts of this I actually survived. We were in 2 vehicles that night, heading north through Big Sur after a long weekend. My car in front, my friend's old camper van behind. You know that feeling of comfort you get from having familiar headlights in your rear view, like a tether to sanity? That's how it was for the first few hours. Tight curves, sheer drops, no guardrail in spots. My focus was glued to the road, but every time I checked the mirror, those twin beams were there, holding the lane, keeping pace. It was late, but the sky was clear. The kind of night where the stars look close enough to scrape with your antenna and the sea is just a black void breathing against the rocks below. Somewhere south of Big Sur proper, the radio went to static and never came back. Service bars disappeared. The world shrank to the white lines, the cliff, and the dark. I remember passing a sign warning about falling rocks and narrow lanes, that yellow silhouette of a car tilted at the edge of nothing. I checked the clock, 12:41 a.m., and told myself, 1 more hour, then motel beds and bad coffee. I flashed my high beams twice, our little prearranged "you good" signal. The van answered once, all good. Then we hit the fog. It wasn't a gentle mist creeping in. It was a wall, thick and sudden. One bend and done. My headlights slammed into it and bounced back, turning the road into a gray tunnel. I dropped from 50 to 20 almost without thinking, knuckles whitening on the wheel. On my right, where I knew the ocean was, there was nothing at all. Just a blank whiteness where the world ended. On my left, the rock face loomed so close in places I could have reached out and touched it. Highway 1 in daylight is terrifying enough. In blind fog, it feels like driving along the edge of a sketch someone only half finished. I checked the mirror for the van. Nothing. No halo of light. No faint glow diffused by fog. Just my own weak red tail lights staining the mist. Heart rate ticked up. I told myself he'd hung back, being cautious. Maybe he'd slowed more than I had. Maybe he'd pulled into one of the tiny dirt turnouts that appear and vanish in the dark. The road gave me nowhere safe to stop and check, not without risking getting rear-ended by some other idiot out in this. So I inched forward, half of my brain on the asphalt, half straining at the mirror like I could will those headlights to appear. They never did. The fog thinned as abruptly as it had swallowed us. One moment it was cotton in front of the windshield. The next it was shredded, trailing away in tatters. Stars came back. I rolled over a small bridge, heard faintly water rushing far below. The dash clock now said 1:03 a.m. I sucked in a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and eased around a curve that spilled me out onto a slightly wider straightaway overlooking the water. That's when I knew something was wrong with more than just the weather. Because straightaways are generous on that road, you can see a long way in your mirrors when the air is clear. Behind me, Highway 1 unspooled along the cliff for what had to be half a mile. Empty. No headlights, no sweeping beams taking a corner, no distant pinpricks. Just blacktop, rock, and void. If the van had simply lagged, I would have seen it by then. I pulled into the next turnout, a gravel scrape big enough for 2 cars, and waited. You can probably feel that weight just hearing about it. Engine ticking, ocean chewing at the shore far below. A faint wind coming up over the cliff face, bringing with it the cold, salty breath of something too big to see. 1 minute, 2, 5. I killed my lights to see better. Still nothing. The road behind me lay blank and indifferent. Panic doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps. First, it was a sharp, logical worry. Breakdown, maybe. Flat tire, old camper, old engine. Then it turned into pictures in my head. Twisted metal against rock, faint glow of hazard lights halfway down an embankment, white van bodies plummeting off in news clips. I told myself I'd turn around at the next place wide enough to manage it. Until then, I would keep moving forward and watch for anything out of place. Except the next wide place never seemed to come. The curves kept tightening, the road curling back on itself like it was wrapping me in. I passed one sign for a state park I didn't recognize, another for a campground I knew for a fact was miles further north than we should have been. Not this soon. My odometer insisted I had barely gone more than a few miles since the fog. Hours felt like they'd passed. Distance and time had gone out of sync. At some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, a green reflective sign sprang up on the right shoulder. Next service is 30 miles. I'd seen that sign on the way down, but I knew which direction it had been facing then. This one was wrong. It was oriented like I was driving south, back toward where I'd started, even though I hadn't turned around. My stomach rolled. The map in my head stopped matching what my eyes saw. Somewhere between one blind turn and the next, I realized I couldn't remember the last landmark I'd passed. Not a bridge, not a named turnout, not a mile marker. Just curve after curve, each one an echo of the last. The cliffs on the ocean side all look the same at night. So does the black water below. I started to feel like I'd been dropped into one of those looping dash cam clips, the ones that run the same 5 seconds on repeat while the counter in the corner lies about progress. When your brain can't trust distance or time, it grabs anything solid. I grabbed the absence of the van and held it like an ice cube in my fist. Something had happened. Either I'd lost a chunk of road, blackout, micro-sleep, whatever you want to call it, or there was a stretch along that cliff where 2 vehicles could enter a fog bank and only one would ever come out. It was nearly 2 a.m. when civilization reasserted itself in the form of a cluster of lights, a gas station, a cafe, a couple of dark motels. I pulled off, legs shaking, and parked under the hard fluorescence. The clock on my dash said 1:19. My phone, which buzzed back to life with reception, said 2:47. I'd lost almost 90 minutes somewhere between that first fog bank and this parking lot. No missed calls, no messages from my friend in the van. When I finally got through to him hours later, he answered like nothing was wrong. Said he'd gotten tired of the cliff and turned inland at a junction we both knew had been closed for months due to slides. He swore he'd watched my taillights disappear ahead of him and figured I'd just kept going. I told him about the fog, the stretch of road that refused to end, the way the map hadn't matched the signs. He went quiet. Then he said, "We never hit fog. Clear sky the whole way, according to him. Dry, easy, no issues." We compared notes later, looking at a paper map. His route and mine should have overlapped for at least another hour after the last point we both remembered, the turnout above a particular beach. But our timelines didn't line up. There was a missing piece, a gap neither of us could account for. Just a section of Highway 1 where, for one of us, the world kept on behaving, and for the other, reality folded. Search and rescue will tell you about cars that go off those cliffs and aren't found for days, weeks, sometimes years. Lost in brush, hidden in ravines, swallowed by the Pacific. They'll talk about missing persons cases tied to last known pings along that road, about skid marks leading nowhere. But no one tells you what it feels like to be the car that didn't go over. The one that kept driving through whatever space opens when the ocean and the mountain decide to pinch a piece of road out of the world. So if you ever take Highway 1 at night, do yourself a favor. Respect the signs about fog and cliffs and no services next 30 miles. And if the stars vanish all at once, if your GPS starts to insist you're driving in open ocean, if the taillights you've been following suddenly aren't there anymore, don't assume they just got off at a turnout you missed. Some stretches of that highway give things back. Some don't. And sometimes, the only proof that you slid through one of those missing pieces is the way your clock and your memory refuse to agree on how long you were actually alone out there. You know how every long drive has that one stretch you dread? Not because it's dangerous, but because it's annoying. For a lot of people on I-70, that place is Breezewood, Pennsylvania, the so-called town of motels, where the interstate dumps you onto a strip of stoplights, gas stations, and fast food before you're allowed back onto real highway. Everybody complains about the traffic and the signs and the way it feels like road trip purgatory. I used to complain too. I don't anymore. Now, when I talk about Breezewood, it's in a low voice, like I'm afraid the road might be listening. I was driving solo that night, hauling across Pennsylvania to make it home before dawn. You know that punch-drunk feeling you get at 2 or 3 a.m., when the radio's just background noise and the green exit signs start to blur together? That's where I was. Awake, but in that thin way, like a film of glass over sleep. I knew Breezewood was coming up because my GPS did its usual weird thing. The smooth, purple line of I-70 broke apart, and suddenly I was being told to follow US 30 through town before rejoining the turnpike. Every time, it bothers me. Highways aren't supposed to have traffic lights. They're not supposed to just end under neon and billboards. If you've never been through there at night, picture this. You're on a proper interstate, speed steady, trees whipping by, and then the road just stops. Overpasses loom above you, but your lane drops onto a surface street lined with motels, big rig parking lots, and chain signs buzzing in sickly colors. A couple of traffic lights hang over an intersection jammed with sleepy travelers who maybe thought they were done making decisions for the night. It feels like someone took a highway and spliced a strip mall parking lot right into its spine. The weirdness started small. The first light I hit turned yellow way too fast. 1 second it was green, the next it was red, like it had skipped a step. No cross traffic, no pedestrians. Just me, sitting at a dead stop on a road that had felt like it should never stop at all. I remember glancing at the clock, 2:14 a.m., and thinking, fine, 2 lights, gas, back on the turnpike. I could see the ramp signs in the distance, those comforting shields promising a return to the fast, anonymous flow. When the light finally flipped green, I rolled through the intersection and into the heart of Breezewood. Even at that hour, the place glowed. Gas stations, truck stops, motels, all lit up like they were trying to outblare each other, even though only a handful of cars and a couple of semis shared the road with me. Sodium lamps cast everything in that flat, ugly orange that makes faces look sick. It wasn't exactly crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Just thin, like a crowd after last call. My GPS told me to stay straight and then make a left toward the turnpike ramps. I'd done it a dozen times. No big deal. But as I rolled up to the second light, the one just before you turn toward the toll booths, I noticed something off. The lanes didn't look right. You know how your memory keeps a rough sketch of certain places, even if you don't consciously think about them? Mine was screaming that there had been 3 lanes here last time. Tonight, there were only 2. The turn arrows painted on the pavement were wrong. 1 lane with a double left, 1 with straight or right, but pointed at nothing I could identify. I chalked it up to construction. They're always rebuilding something around there. Cones. Temporary paint. My headlights picked up those plastic barrels and reflective tape in my periphery. The light went red as I approached. I stopped. A semi pulled up behind me, close enough that I could feel the vibration of its engine through my seat. We idled together under the buzzing traffic light, the red glare bleaching color from the dash. That's when I realized the cross street was empty. Not just no cars, empty. Dead. The motel lots, the gas station driveways, the turnpike entrance lane, no movement at all. No cars cruising past in either direction. No parking lot shadows shifting, just rows of frozen vehicles sitting under harsh white lights, like a stage set after the actors have gone home. Red stayed red. The timing felt off again. Long, too long for a light with no cross traffic. I drummed my fingers on the wheel, checked the time, 2:14 a.m. again. I frowned, tapped the face of the clock like I could knock it into honesty. It didn't budge. Behind me, the semi let out a short, irritated blast of air, not quite a honk, more like a throat clear. I glanced in my mirror. The cab was there, big and blue, chrome catching the streetlight. But the windshield was pure black. No cab light, no glow from a phone, no hint of a face. Just a rectangular void where a driver should have been. I told myself the angle was bad, the glass was tinted. The reflection of the red light was throwing me off. I twisted a little in my seat, trying to get a different view. For a split second, I saw something like an outline. A shape in the darkness behind the wheel. Not sitting exactly. More like hanging, weightless, as if the cab were full of deep water and whatever was in there was just suspended in it. Then the red glare flared brighter, washing my rear view in color, and the impression snapped like a rubber band. I was alone with my own breathing again. The light should have changed by then. It didn't. The streets on either side remained perfectly still. No engines, no distant tires. Just the hum of fluorescent signs and the high, insect-like whine of something electrical nearby. Breezewood is famous for traffic jams and chaos. It's not supposed to feel like the last place on Earth. But sitting there, I had the sudden vertigo sensation that if I stepped out of the car, there would be no people at all. Just paper cutouts, cars with no insides, buildings with only front walls. My chest tightened. The logical part of me knew I was tired, that my brain was playing tricks. The animal part didn't care. It wanted motion, any motion. I glanced left at the ramp signs again. For a second, my heart dropped. The shields were wrong. Instead of the familiar I-76 and Turnpike logos, the green boards bore route numbers I didn't recognize. Combinations of digits and arrows that didn't match any map I'd ever seen. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. When I looked back, the usual symbols were there, exactly where they should be. The semi behind me revved once, a low, impatient growl. That was enough. I made a decision I still can't explain. I inched forward, creeping through the red, slow enough that if a cop jumped out, I could claim confusion. As my front tires crossed the invisible line of the intersection, the light flicked green. No yellow transition, just instant permission. Under the gantries, past the gas stations, up the small incline toward the on-ramp. The further I got from the stoplight, the more the world seemed to breathe again. Cars appeared at pumps. A figure pushed open a glass door at a fast food place. Sound came back in layers. By the time I hit the turnpike proper, my hands were shaking on the wheel. I aimed the car west and tried to convince myself I'd just had a micro-sleep-fueled anxiety spiral. Mile after mile of toll road unspooled under me, smooth and anonymous. I stopped at a service plaza an hour later, more for my nerves than for gas. Inside, I bought coffee and forced myself to chat idly with the cashier, just to prove other humans existed. "You come through Breezewood a lot?" he asked, making small talk as he rang me up. "Too much," I said. "Weirdest place on the interstate." He smirked. "Yeah. Folks either love it or hate it, or get stuck." He tapped his fingers on the counter in a little beat. "You ever hear the joke that there are drivers there who've been waiting at that light since the 70s? I swallowed. "Feels like it." He shrugged. "Light system's been glitchy for years. People say sometimes it just hangs. No cross traffic, no nothing. Like the computer forgets anyone's there. Had a trucker come in once swearing he sat through 3 full cycles with nobody moving but him. Cameras didn't show any delay, though. From here, it looked like he barely slowed down. On the way back to my car, I pulled up my trip log. The timestamp for when I should have been in Breezewood and the timestamp on my toll ticket didn't match the distance. I was missing about 10 minutes. Not a lot. Just enough to sit at a red light that, by all accounts, never stayed red. I've been through since then, in daylight, in traffic. Breezewood looks like what it is. A chaotic knot of commerce built on a quirk of highway funding and toll road politics. But I won't drive it at 2 a.m. anymore. Not because I'm afraid of getting lost in the ramps, but because, in that thin hour, I'm not entirely sure the place plays by the same rules as the rest of the interstate system. So if you ever roll off I-70 in the dark and find yourself funneled under the overpass into that neon valley, pay attention to the lights. If the cross streets are empty, if the motels look like sets, if the red above you lingers just a hair too long while the clock on your dash refuses to move, keep your foot ready. Because some drivers joke that Breezewood is road trip hell. Others will tell you quietly that it's more like a trap in time, a quarter-mile stretch of US 30 where, for a few unlucky souls, the highway doesn't just slow you down. It forgets to let you leave. You ever notice how snow doesn't really fall in the mountains? It comes at you sideways, like it's trying to erase you off the road. That's the part people never tell you about winter passes. They talk about the views, the clean air, the way the stars look close enough to touch. They don't talk about what it feels like when the world goes white and something in that white starts to move wrong. Tonight, slide into the passenger seat with me for a bit. Feel the heater fighting a losing battle, the glass vibrating under crosswinds. And I'll tell you what happened on the pass between Idaho and Montana the night the voices came over the radio that weren't supposed to be there. Truckers call it riding the crown up there. Keeping your wheels on that slightly raised middle of the lane so you don't drift into the deep snow ruts by the shoulder. I was hauling east on I-90 toward Lookout Pass, that stretch along the Bitterroot and Clearwater country that the weather folks love to paint bright red on the warning maps. Evening had already gone gray, the kind of flat light that makes distance lie. The signs back in Coeur d'Alene had flashed winter storm warning, chains required at pass. But the first 100 miles weren't bad. Thin flurries, wet pavement, the usual. I'd made this run enough times to know the real trouble waits right up on the line. The CB was my lifeline that night. You ever ride with it on low, just enough volume to hear the old-timers swap weather reports and gossip. It's like sharing a highway with ghosts, voices with no faces, drifting in and out with the terrain. Guys up ahead were calling it sloppy but passable. "Keep it under 40 and you'll be fine," one of them said. I remember glancing at the outside temp, 27 degrees and dropping. The snow on the shoulder had started to stack higher than the hood of my rig, plowed into frozen waves lining the road. By the time I hit the last chain-up area, the sky had closed in. Heavy flakes, real ones now, swirling hard in the beams. I pulled over with the others, crawled out into air that bit through my jacket, and wrestled the chains onto my drive tires with fingers that went numb faster than they should have. You can't think too hard out there. You just do the motions you've done 100 times. Hook, pull, cinch. Metal slapping rubber while wind funnels down the cut in the mountains and whistles through your teeth. Back in the cab, heater on full, gloves steaming on the dash, I eased back onto the grade. The world shrank fast. High beams were useless. They just turned the snowfall into a solid white curtain. Low beams gave me maybe 20, 25 feet of lane, 2 glowing rails of snowpack, and the faint suggestion of a guardrail beyond. Everything else was darkness and motion. I settled in behind another set of taillights. Far enough back not to eat his spray, close enough that if he vanished, I'd know something had gone very wrong. The CB chatter got tighter. Less joking, more numbers. Roads gone to ice past the runaway ramp. Left lanes gone. White out at the top, watch yourself. The kind of clipped, efficient talk that tells you every man on that frequency is concentrating as hard as you are. I rolled with them into the teeth of it, engine humming low, chains biting, wind buffeting the trailer hard enough to make it twitch in the mirrors. Then, very slowly, the other voices thinned. One guy signed off to take the next turnout and waited out. Another faded into static as he dropped down the other side. The truck ahead of me, my last real reference point, pulled into a chain-off area and blinked his hazards as I crept by. I gave him a tap on the air horn and felt more alone with each foot of elevation. At the summit, the storm stopped pretending. You know those snow globes you had as a kid, where one shake turns everything inside into a blizzard? Imagine driving through the middle of one. The wind came screaming over the ridge, slamming into the side of my trailer so hard the whole rig leaned. Snow didn't fall. It flew, horizontal, a river's worth of white racing across the lanes. The road under my tires disappeared. I was driving on memory, on faith. Somewhere down there were 2 ruts and a crown of asphalt. Somewhere off to the right was a drop I did not want to get intimate with. I did the thing they tell you not to do. I slowed almost to a crawl. 15 miles an hour, maybe less, hazards on, eyes locked on the faintest trace of the center line whenever the wind let the snow swirl thin enough to show it. Both hands on the wheel, forearms burning. My world was the dash, the windshield, and the ghostly shadow of a snowbank maybe 8 feet away. Everything else had ceased to exist. That's when I heard the first voice. "Southbound, you missed him." It came over Channel 19 as clear as if the guy was sitting in the passenger seat. Male, middle-aged, no accent I could place. Calm. Too calm for the conditions. I thumbed the mic without taking my eyes off the void. "Say again?" I said. "You talking to me?" Silence. Just the hiss of carrier and the occasional crackle of someone far off, talking about a scale house in God knows where. I told myself I'd misheard. Wind noise? Radio bleed? My own brain filling in words where there were none. It happens. Fatigue and storm static make their own language if you listen too long. A minute later, time is a guess up there. I caught something with the corner of my eye. A shape on the right shoulder ahead, darker than the snow, hunched low. My heart gave a solid, painful thud. Human. My mind supplied before I had details. Person. On foot. In this. That can't be right. I crept closer. The figure didn't wave, didn't turn. Just stood at the edge of the drift, between the road and the drop-off. Facing into the storm like it was looking for something down below. No car. No stranded vehicle nosed into the bank. Just that one shape. Too thin for the temperature, coat flapping, head bare. At the very last second, as my bumper drew level, it turned toward me. There was nothing in its face. Not, it had no face, dramatic. Nothing like that. Just blank. A pale oval, features smudged by the snow in such a way that my eyes couldn't decide where its eyes were, where its mouth should be. My stomach flipped. In that instant, every story I'd ever heard about people freezing to death in storms and wandering back onto the road came crawling up my spine. My foot twitched toward the brake. The chains growled. Some part of me screamed that if I stopped up there, I might never get moving again. Another part whispered that I was leaving someone to die. I looked in the mirror. For half a heartbeat, the figure was there in the red wash of my taillights, standing in the lane now instead of on the shoulder, facing me square on. Then the snow swallowed everything again. The CB popped. "Southbound," the same calm voice said. "You missed him again." Cold went through me in a way the outside air never could. "Who is this?" I snapped, fear coming out as anger. "You see somebody in the road up here? You call it in. Don't play games in this weather." Long pause, then softly, like someone leaning close to the mic. "Been calling. Nobody hears. You all just keep driving." My hand tightened around the mic. "Where you at?" I demanded. "You up by Lookout? You stuck? Talk to me." The radio answered with a squeal of feedback, then dropped back into empty crackle. In the side window, a gust of wind slammed a sheet of snow against the glass, so hard it sounded like gravel. I told myself it was a prank. Some bored driver parked safe somewhere, messing with whoever was desperate enough to have their CB turned up. But my eyes kept dragging to the ditches, searching for any break in the white that could be a car, a body, a coat. More than once, I caught the suggestion of a person shape just beyond the guardrail, keeping pace with me. Each time, by the time I focused, it shifted, resolved into twisted brush or a rock outcrop heavy with rime. The descent on the Montana side is longer, shallower, but that night it felt infinite. Mile after mile of second gear crawling, engine brake humming under my feet, snow clawing at the windshield in never-ending waves. My shoulders ached, my jaw hurt from clenching. The CB stayed mostly quiet, just the occasional crackle of distant drivers on flatter ground, talking about things as boring and comforting as fuel prices and way stations. Then, out of nowhere, the same channel flared to life. "Northbound, back it down, wreck in the curve. You're coming in hot." The voice wasn't talking to me this time. Different call sign, different direction. I heard another driver grunt acknowledgement, his tone weary but grateful. "Any injuries?" A beat of dead air. Then, 3 in the ditch, 1 walking. Been walking a while. My pulse stuttered. I clicked in, uninvited. "You got a mile marker on that?" I asked. "Montana side or Idaho?" Static. Then the calm voice again, almost amused now. "Doesn't matter." "You won't stop." I cursed into the mic and killed the CB with a jab of my thumb, the anger human, immediate, a relief compared to the thin dread that had been hanging over me. The cab fell into cocoon silence. Only the wind and the tire noise remained. it was worse. Without the murmur of other lives out there, the white world pressing against the glass felt total. Somewhere below, faint at first and then growing, I saw an orange glow seeping up through the storm. Sodium lights, plow depot, chain-off area, civilization. The grade leveled under my wheels. Snow turned back into sleet, then heavy rain. The world resolved itself back into sensible dimensions. Wet black pavement, slushy shoulders, reflective signs pointing to Missoula and beyond. I pulled into the first truck stop I found. Hands so stiff I had to peel them off the wheel finger by finger. Inside, under buzzing fluorescents and the smell of burnt coffee, a small cluster of drivers huddled around the weather channel on the TV. I drifted over. The ticker along the bottom talked about the pass I'd just come through. Multiple slide-offs, one confirmed fatal, one missing hiker's search suspended until morning due to conditions. "You hear about the guy up there?" One of the older truckers asked me when he noticed I was still in my coat, snow melting off my shoulders. Some local went missing a few days back, parked at a trailhead before the storm. Sheriff's office been asking us to keep eyes out. Figure if he made it down to the road, somebody would have seen him. I thought about the shape on the shoulder, the blank suggestion of a face turning toward my grill. The wet, patient voice on the radio saying we kept driving. I thought about how, in that storm, a person could be 6 feet off your lane and you'd never know unless they were standing right in the beams. "You see anybody?" the older man asked, casual, like he already knew the answer. I could have said yes. Could have dropped the weight of my guilt into his hands and let the proper authorities chew on it. But the truth was, I didn't know what I'd seen. A trick of snowfall. A guilt ghost my brain conjured under pressure. Or something else. Something that had been there longer than any one missing hiker, waiting for nights exactly like that. I shook my head. "Just snow," I said. "Nothing moving." He nodded like that was what he'd expected. "Yeah," he said. "That pass keeps more than it gives back." Later, in the bunk, with the storm muffled to a distant hiss on the roof, I turned the CB back on and left it at a whisper. Just enough to hear if anyone called my handle. Around 3 a.m., as I hovered in that half-sleep of the road, the speaker crackled once, sharp as a knuckle rap. Then, in that same calm, unplaceable voice, I heard, "Next time, stop." Nothing else. No call sign, no static lit-in, no carrier tone. Just those 3 words, sliding into the dark of the cab and settling under my skin like cold. You can tell yourself whatever you want about what that was. Radio interference, overtired nerves, a conscience picking the worst possible way to get your attention. But if you ever find yourself crossing between Idaho and Montana in a winter storm, chains clattering, world reduced to a few feet of white, and you catch a shape on the shoulder that doesn't wave, doesn't move, just watches, remember this. Remember the way the CB can feel like a lifeline and a haunting at the same time. And remember that the only thing lonelier than being the one stranded in that blizzard is being the one who drives past, hearing a stranger's voice in your ear telling you, too late, that you missed your chance to turn around. If you've ever driven the interstate late at night and seen an old frontage road running alongside, cracked asphalt, dead signs, maybe a rusted-out gas pump, and wondered what it would feel like to leave the safe, fast lane and follow it, this is the answer. Old Route 66 still runs parallel to parts of I-40 through the Texas-Oklahoma stretch. And on one trip years ago, I took that frontage road and found a motel that, as far as I can tell, doesn't exist anymore and maybe hadn't for a long time. I wasn't looking for anything haunted. I was just tired of semis boxing me in and wanted to see a piece of the real Mother Road before it vanished entirely. The exit I took wasn't even marked as 66. Just a faded business loop sign and one of those generic blue boards promising gas, food, lodging. The kind you stop trusting after a few empty exits. The ramp dropped me down to a frontage road that had once been someone's main street. Neon poles with no tubes, big vintage signs with letters missing. CAF, Econ Lodge, Last Stow. A whole little world the interstate had forgotten to tell. The sun had gone, but it wasn't fully night yet. Just that in-between blue where everything looks a little unreal. I rolled along at 30, tires humming over patched blacktop, half expecting to see tumbleweeds because that's what all the photos show you. Instead, it was just empty. Storefronts with paper over the windows, gas pumps wrapped in yellow tape, a big skeletal pole where a motel sign must have hung once, the metal ribs still spelling out some old promise if you squinted. That's when I saw the vacancy sign. It was on the right, a little way down from an abandoned station. A classic roadside neon box, red letters over the word motel. Only the word itself was dark. The only thing still lit was a smaller rectangle below it. Vacancy, burning a steady, almost gentle red. No flicker, no half-dead tubes. Just a clean, inviting glow in a row of otherwise dead lights. For some reason, that bothered me more than if the whole sign had been blazing. It was like a single eye still open in a sleeping face. The building behind it looked fine. Not new, but not gutted either. A single-story strip of rooms with doors all in a line, the paint on the walls faded but not peeling. A little office at one end with a glass door and a lit open sign in red script. Not neon, one of those cheap LED ones, but it was on. In the parking lot, an old sedan sat under one of the security lights, the kind of generic dark car that could have been 10 or 20 years old. No plates I could see from the road. I told myself I'd been on the road too long to be picky. A room was a room. It was late enough that chain motels would be more expensive, and there was something romantic, in a stupid way, about staying in a real Route 66 motor court before they all turned into dust and history blurbs. So I turned in. You know when your tires leave smooth asphalt and hit a surface that's been patched 1,000 times? That lumpy, uneven thrum? That's what the lot felt like. My headlights swept over the row of doors, room numbers in metal plaques, curtains drawn tight. No movement, no silhouettes. No TV flickers sneaking around the edges of the shades. Just stillness. Like the building was holding its breath. The office lit up as I pulled past, the interior bright and oddly yellow. I parked in front of it and killed the engine. For a moment, the silence rang. The interstate was close, maybe a quarter-mile off, but I couldn't hear it at all. No distant white noise of tires, no low growl of 18-wheelers. Just the tick of my cooling engine and a faint wind moving through some dry grass behind the building. Inside the office, it smelled like old paper and something sweet underneath. Maybe air freshener trying to cover dust. A little bell sat on the counter. Behind it, a wall of key hooks, each with a brass key fob hanging, perfectly spaced. No computer. Just an old ledger book open to a blank page, a pen resting at an angle like someone had just set it down. No one at the desk. "Hello?" I called, because you do. My voice came back to me a fraction of a second later, thinner, like it had already traveled too far. I rang the bell. The sound was small and painfully clear. Somewhere in a back room, something clicked. A door, maybe. Footsteps? I couldn't tell. But a figure did not appear. As I waited, I found myself staring at the row of keys. Every fob had a number stamped into it, 1 through 18. All of them hung there. None missing, none shifted so much as a fraction of an inch, like no one had taken a key off that board in a very long time. A fly buzzed somewhere in the ceiling light, but I didn't see it. The hum of electricity felt louder than it should have. I almost backed out then. Told myself I'd just go find a franchise place by the interstate with key cards and lobby coffee. I turned to leave and froze. Outside the office window, just beyond the glass, the parking lot didn't look like the one I'd pulled into. My car was there in the foreground, sure. Same make, same color. But behind it, under that lone security light, the sedan I'd noticed from the road had multiplied. 2 more cars sat in a staggered row. One was an old station wagon, boxy and sun-faded. The other looked like something from the 90s, low and long, dusty. All of them parked nose into the room doors. None of them had been there 30 seconds before. I stared, heart thudding. Nothing about them suggested movement. No brake lights, no exhaust. They just looked placed, as if they'd rolled in on nights decades apart and never rolled out again. The bell on the counter chimed on its own. I whipped back around. It still sat where I'd left it, perfectly centered. No one behind it. No rustle of movement, no back-of-house door easing closed. Just that soft ring hanging in the air, like something had struck it a moment ago. "Look," I said, and my voice cracked in the middle, embarrassing in a way that felt strangely loud. "I just need a room for the night. Cash is fine." I dug in my pocket and laid a couple of bills on the counter without thinking about it, just wanting to prove, to myself as much as anyone, that I was real, anchored. The bills looked wrong in the yellow light. Not counterfeit wrong, just out of place, too crisp against the age of everything else. That was when the phone rang. An old beige desk phone sat half hidden under some brochures. It exploded into sound, shrill, the kind of ring you don't really hear anymore except in movies. I jumped so hard my elbow banged the ledger. The caller ID window was dead. No glow, no text, just a black rectangle. The phone kept ringing, over and over, like it had been waiting a very long time and would not be ignored. You ever answer something you know you shouldn't, just to make it stop? My hand moved before my brain caught up. I lifted the receiver to my ear. For a second there was nothing. No line hiss, no click. Just a thick, flat silence. Then, so softly I almost missed it, a sound like distant traffic came through. Not modern, no high-pitched whine of small engines. A heavier, older rush, like big carbureted cars on a 2-lane. Underneath, the faintest trickle of voices. Laughter. Someone arguing about a map. A kid yelling that they were hungry. "Front desk," I said, because I couldn't think of anything else. The voices on the other end stopped. The traffic sound didn't. It grew louder, washing in my ear like ocean surf. For a heartbeat, I was sure I could smell gasoline and hot asphalt, feel sun on my face instead of the dim office lamp. Then, cutting clean through the noise, a single voice spoke. It was hard to place. Genderless almost, dusty with age or distance. "Checking out," it said. The line went dead. I realized my hand was shaking so badly the receiver knocked against the cradle when I set it down. The room felt tighter, like the walls had shifted an inch closer while I was listening. When I looked back at the window, more cars had appeared. An old pickup with a camper shell, a compact with a rusted roof, a minivan with one of those stick-figure family decals on the back. The air outside them looked smudged, like heat haze. But the night was cool. None of the door handles moved. None of the windows were fogged from breath. I backed out of the office, keyless, money forgotten on the counter. The bell did not ring when the door closed. Outside, the sky had gone fully dark, stars swallowed by a high blanket of cloud. The motel's rooms were still lifeless, curtains drawn, no glow at the edges. The only light came from the office and that steady vacancy sign, humming quietly. My car sat just where I'd left it. I put my hand on the hood. Cold. Too cold, considering the engine had been running not 10 minutes before. It felt like it had been parked there a long time. For a second, looking at the row of silent vehicles, I saw mine not as a visitor, but as a new installment in an exhibit. A fresh specimen that would, given time, gather dust and stories until some future traveler came along and wondered who'd driven it last. A low wind moved down the lot, carrying with it a faint chorus of sounds that didn't belong to that moment. The tinkle of old glass signage, a burst of radio music from 50 years ago, kids squealing as they ran from a car to a pool. It was all there and gone in a breath. I slid into the driver's seat and forced myself not to look in the rearview mirror until I was back on the main road. When I did finally glance up, I caught one last glimpse of the motel in the distance. In the mirror, the building looked older, sagging, roofline uneven. The vacancy sign still burned, but dimmer now, like it was far away or struggling. And for a flicker, right before the curve took it out of sight, I thought I saw figures standing on the walkway in front of the rooms, not waving, just watching. Lines of pale faces behind the rail, like people waiting to see if I'd make the same choice they did. I hit the interstate again, merging into the anonymous river of headlights, like a man waking from a dream. The exit number ticked by behind me. The blue services sign for that town listed gas and food, but no lodging. The next big chain motel I stopped at? The clerk asked where I'd driven in from. I gave the town name. She frowned at the computer. "We don't have any listed properties there," she said. "Hasn't been a motel in that exit area since, I don't know, the 80s? They all closed when the new bypass went in." I went back later, in daylight, just to prove I hadn't completely lost it. Same frontage road, same dead gas station, same skeletal sign pole. But where the motel had been, where I remember turning in, there was nothing but a cracked concrete slab and waist-high weeds, an old driveway half swallowed by dirt. No office, no rooms, no vacancy. Maybe that's all this is. A tired driver's brain, stitching together nostalgia and empty space into something haunting. Or maybe there are places along the old mother road where time still knots, where all those family vacations and lonely overnights and one-way trips bleed together and refuse to fade. If you ever decide to leave the interstate at night and chase a bit of history down some broken stretch of 6-6, watch for the one sign that's still lit when everything else is dark. If the only word glowing is vacancy and the lot is a little too full of cars that don't seem to belong to this year, keep driving. Some motels on that road will give you a bed and a story. Others feel more like the last line on a ledger that's been waiting a very, very long time for you to check in. If you're a parent, there's a special kind of dread you carry that nobody warns you about. It's not monsters under the bed or strangers at the park. It's that tiny, razor-sharp thought. What if, just once, you fail to show up when your kid is counting on you? That's where this started for me. On the outer loop around the city, alone in the car, halfway between daycare and home. with the realization slowly crawling up my spine that the child in the car seat behind me was not my son. It was one of those rainy evenings on the Beltway, where the sky turns the same color as the pavement and everything smears. Headlights, tail lights, wiper streaks. I was on autopilot, like every other commuter around I-285 does, sucked into that endless stream of brake lights and lane changes. You know how it is. Work ran long, daycare was closing. I'd grabbed my boy, strapped him into the back, and merged straight into the perimeter. The car was filled with the usual mess: juice box straw wrappers, stray cracker crumbs, a cartoon song humming low from his tablet. Normal, comforting. Except he was quiet. If you have a kid, you know their silence better than their voice. My son usually narrates everything: cars, clouds, the color of the trucks passing us. That night, nothing. Just the hiss of the tires on wet concrete and the squeak thump of the wipers. At first, I was grateful. Long day, no energy for 1,000 questions. But the longer the quiet stretched, the more wrong it felt. At one point, traffic slowed to a crawl near an interchange. Construction, I think, one of those spaghetti tangles of lanes and barrels Atlanta seems to love. Red brake lights glowed hot on the wet road. We inched forward. I glanced into the rear view, more out of habit than concern, expecting to see his little head lolling to the side, mouth open in sleep. Instead, I met a pair of eyes looking straight back at me that did not belong to my child. It wasn't a horror movie shock. No blood, no fangs. Just wrong. The face was almost his. Close enough that my brain tried to slot it into the familiar template. Same hair color, same round cheeks, same tiny nose. But the eyes were too focused, too sharp, like they belonged to someone much older who knew exactly what they were seeing. My son's eyes wander, get distracted. These didn't. They were studying me, patient and unblinking. My hands tightened on the wheel hard enough that my knuckles popped. For a heartbeat, I convinced myself I was seeing a reflection, some weird angle of my own face mixed with a car behind us. I blinked, quick, and looked again. The child, my child, was still staring, head tilted just enough that it didn't match any posture I'd seen him hold. There was no tablet in his hands. His fingers were folded neatly in his lap. "You okay back there, buddy?" I forced out, trying to keep my voice light. Silence. Then, after a moment, a voice replied. It was high, but not in the way I knew. The cadence was off. The words came out too carefully, like someone trying on a language. "Do you remember when this road was 2 lanes?" The hair on my arms stood up. That is not the kind of thing a 4-year-old asks in rush hour traffic. My mouth went dry. Outside, horns started to bleat in that impatient chorus people get when they've accepted they're not moving and want everyone else to share their misery. Inside, the air felt suddenly thin. "What did you say?" I asked, because sanity clings to questions. Those not quite right eyes blinked once, slowly. "Before they widened it," he said. "Before all this." He glanced out the window as if at something beyond the rain and taillights. It was quieter. I told myself he was parroting something. Maybe a phrase he'd heard on the radio. Maybe something a teacher had said. But my brain couldn't find the memory. Every second I spent looking at him in the mirror was another second not watching the mess of lane shifts and sudden stops around us. So I tore my eyes back to the road and swallowed hard. That's when my phone buzzed in the center console. I hit the speaker button automatically. It was my wife. Her voice came through thin and frayed. "Where are you?" "On the loop," I said, trying to sound normal. "Halfway home." "Why?" There was a pause long enough for my stomach to knot. "Daycare just called," she said. "They close in 10 minutes. They said you haven't picked him up." For a moment, the world went muffled, like someone had put cotton in my ears. The traffic sound, the wipers, the low hum of the engine, all of it backed away. "What?" I managed. He's in the car. I'm looking at him. Don't joke." "I'm not joking." Her voice was rising now, that sharp edge of controlled panic. "They're standing there with him right now. He's upset. Where are you?" In the mirror, the child listened with an expression that was almost amused. Like this was a story he'd heard before and was curious how I'd tell it this time. I killed the call without answering. That's not something I'm proud of. But in that second, I needed the voice in the car to be the only one I dealt with. My heart was pounding so hard, my vision shook with each beat. My logical brain clawed for rational explanations, daycare mix-up, someone's wires crossed. But simple math kept failing. If my son was physically at the daycare, then who or what was buckled into the seat behind me? The rain intensified, drumming on the roof so loud it was like being inside a drum. The beltway around us was a river of light and noise, exits flying by, none of them in a place I felt safe to pull over. Concrete barriers boxed us in. Construction barrels loomed. Every shoulder was either stripped away or ending in a steep, slick slope. I was trapped in the flow. "Who are you?" I asked the mirror, the words coming out almost a whisper. The child smiled then. It was my son's smile, but slowed down, stretched. "I like this one," he said softly. "It goes all the way around. You can ride it and never have to get off." He wasn't talking like a kid excited about a road. There was something in the tone that made me think of old men on porches, reminiscing. And as he spoke, everything outside the car seemed to thicken. The red smears of brake lights, the white snapshots of headlights. Even the green exit signs looked dimmer, as if seen through bad glass. Another buzz from my phone. Then another. I ignored them. My focus had narrowed to the length of the hood and the wrong child behind me. "I need you to stop talking," I said, more sharply than I meant to. "Now." He tilted his head again, as if examining a bug. "You're afraid," he observed. "They're always afraid when they realize." "Realize what?" "That they left someone behind." The words hit like a physical blow. Images flooded in, unbidden. Tiny hands on glass, a child crying in a dark parking lot. Headlines about daycares, forgetting kids on buses and in vans. I had been so sure I'd done everything right that evening, checked him out, buckled him in, counted his bags. But what if some autopilot routine had glitched? What if my body had driven here and my brain had stayed there? I forced myself to look up, really look, at the figure in the car seat. The more I stared, the less it resolved. The features seemed to flicker at the edges, like an out-of-focus photo my eyes were trying to correct and failing. The clothes weren't exactly right either. The jacket looked slightly out of date. The shoes were wrong brand, not the ones we'd bought last month. Details my brain had glossed over when I'd first loaded the seat, because routine tells you what you're supposed to see, and you rarely bother to question it. Something cold brushed my neck, like the faintest breath. And I realized the car's vents were off. I hadn't touched the controls, but the air was no longer blowing. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield in little bursts. The world outside the glass seemed both too slow and too fast at the same time, like a video buffering at different speeds across different lanes. "I want to get off," I said. and heard how small it sounded. I need to get off this road. There aren't many places to stop, the child thing said mildly. His voice had shifted again, older for just a second, like a radio picking up a different station. Not safely, not tonight. Up ahead, a blue sign loomed out of the gray. Services 1 mile. Gas, food, exit number half obscured by rain. It felt like a lifeline. I locked onto it the way drowning people lock onto anything that floats. I took the exit too fast. The car fishtailed, tired squealing on the wet ramp. Horns erupted behind me. Somehow I kept it together, hands white on the wheel, sliding down the curve until we spilled out into a clutter of parking lots and sodium lights. The noise changed. Still cars, still engines, but broken up by crosswalk beeps and the rumble of shopping carts. I pulled into the first gas station I saw and slammed the car into park under the canopy. For a long second, I just sat, breathing hard, hands fused to the wheel. Then I forced myself to turn. The back seat was empty. No car seat, no straps, no abandoned tablet, no kicked-off shoes, no crumpled jacket. Just the impression in the fabric where the seat had been installed for years, now bare. My heart stuttered. I actually opened the rear door, hoping to find that I had somehow still buckled it in, that the angle from the front had hidden it, that there would be some mundane explanation for how my brain had folded time in on itself. Nothing. My phone, which I had forgotten in the chaos, chimed another notification. Hands shaking, I checked it. Missed calls, a string of texts from my wife. Answer me. Are you okay? Daycare called again. They say he's fine, but you're not there. Police are on their way to check on you. I called her. When she picked up, I could hear our son crying in the background, that specific, high-pitched sob kids get when they're exhausted and confused. It was the most beautiful, awful sound I'd ever heard. I'm at a gas station, I said. Something's wrong. I'm coming back now. Don't let them close. Don't let him out of your sight. She didn't ask what I meant. Later, she would. That night, all that mattered was that I turned the car around and fought my way back through the weaving ramps and angry traffic to the daycare, where my son flung himself into my arms and wrapped his sticky hands around my neck like they'd never let go. He was wearing the jacket I remembered, the shoes I remembered. He smelled like crayons and kid sweat and peanut butter. When I buckled him into his car seat, his actual car seat this time, I checked and rechecked each strap, each clip, until he giggled and told me to stop. On the drive home, I refused to take the Beltway. I crawled through surface streets and stop signs, adding an hour to the trip and not caring. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I saw only my boy's soft, familiar face, finally asleep, cheeks damp but peaceful. It's easy after the fact to rationalize, to say stress and guilt and all those awful news stories about forgotten children got into my head and twisted it into something supernatural. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe my brain conjured a punishing passenger to make sure I never joined those headlines. But here's the part I don't tell many people. A few weeks later, stuck in traffic on the perimeter again, I saw a car in the next lane over. Same make as mine. Same color. A woman at the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes forward. In her back seat, a child in a booster. I only caught a glimpse, a flicker between wiper swipes and spray. But the kid's face, wrong in some small way I couldn't name, was turned toward me, eyes too still, smile too slow. As the car edged ahead, the child lifted one finger and tapped it gently against the glass. Once, like a quiet knock. Then they were gone into the river of red lights. So if you ever find yourself circling one of those big beltways at night, Atlanta, Columbus, anywhere the interstate wraps around a city like a noose, and your kid is just a little too quiet in the back, do one thing for me. Call the daycare. Call home. Make absolutely certain of where your child really is before you trust the reflection in the rear view. Because there are some passengers out there who seem very eager to take that seat. And they know every on-ramp and exit on the loop by heart. If you've ever driven alone long enough, you know there's a point where the road stops feeling like a way to get somewhere and starts feeling like a place that exists only to keep you from arriving. That's where this happened to me. On a desert highway in Nevada, with the gas gauge dropping, the mile markers counting down, and the sick realization creeping in that no matter how far I drove, I wasn't getting any closer to town. For this one, imagine you're not hearing a story secondhand. Imagine you're in the driver's seat with your own hands on the wheel, watching the same numbers pass again and again. I'd cut south off I-80 late, chasing a shortcut that looked smart on the map. The plan was simple. Cross a stretch of US 50, the loneliest road in America. Then drop down a state route that would cut a good hour off my trip. Locals will tell you about that emptiness with a kind of pride. Hundreds of miles of desert, a few tiny towns, big basins between jagged ranges. It sounds romantic when you're talking about it in a bar. At midnight, with no one in front of you and no one in the rear view. It feels less like freedom and more like being the last person alive. By the time the shortcut peeled away from 50, it was full night. No moon. The sky was a vast, dark dome, punched with more stars than any city person really deserves to see. My headlights carved out a tunnel ahead. Pale asphalt, white edge lines, the occasional reflective post. Beyond that, there was nothing but sagebrush and the suggestion of low hills. No farmhouses, no distant glows, just black. A green sign flashed by on the right. Next services, 72 miles. I checked my fuel. A little under half a tank. Enough if I didn't do anything stupid. I told myself I was fine, that the silence in my chest was calm, not the early tightness of anxiety. The road settled into a rhythm. Long, straight stretches broken by gentle dips where dry washes crossed underneath and the asphalt rose over low passes. Then the mile markers started. If you don't pay attention to them, they're just background noise. Little green posts with white numbers ticking off distance from one end of the highway to another. That night, I noticed them because they were all I had to measure progress. The first one I really registered said 23. A mile later, 22. Another mile. 21. Each one a small reassurance that I was eating distance, closing in on the next town, whose name I'd already forgotten. The desert at night is a sound more than a sight. A low, constant hiss of tires on dry pavement, an occasional tick as a pebble kicks up under the chassis. The faint shushing of wind over open ground. After a while, your brain starts to fill in the silence with its own noise. Old songs, half-remembered conversations. I don't know how long I drifted like that before the first wrongness slid in, slippery and small. Mile marker 19. I remember it because of the way the number caught my eye, the clean shape of the 9 in the beam. I drove past it, watched it slide into darkness in the side mirror, and felt a tiny, stupid triumph. 19 miles closer. I glanced at the dash clock. 1:07 a.m. A few minutes later, 5, maybe less, I saw another marker up ahead. Same size, same shape, standing sentinel at the edge of the right shoulder. As it came into range, The number flashed white. 19. I frowned. Told myself I'd misread the last one. Maybe it had been 20, not 19. Easy to mistake at highway speed. The desert doesn't give you much parallax. Everything out there looks the same distance away. I told myself not to obsess about it. But when the next one appeared, I found myself leaning forward anyway. 18. Relief? Progress? Of course. Maybe that first 19 had just stuck in my head and made the second feel like an echo. I checked the fuel again. Just under a quarter now. The needle seemed to be moving faster than the numbers on the posts. My fingers drummed the wheel, restless. The night felt thicker, like the darkness clung a little closer to the glass. The road rolled over a low rise, dipped into a wide, shallow basin. The stars smudged at the horizon where cooler air pooled. I watched the glow of my own headlights bounce gently over the imperfections in the pavement. Somewhere out there, I knew, were the remains of the old emigrant trails. Places like the 40-mile desert where wagon trains left bones scattered along routes that maps now draw as thin, confident lines. People used to die out here from misjudging distances, miscounting miles. That thought sat uneasily in the back of my mind. Another reflective rectangle appeared ahead. I slowed a little without realizing it, squinting. 19. This time, there was no way to pretend I'd mistaken it. The 1, the 9, clear as anything. I passed it, looked in the mirror, saw it retreating behind me, the white numerals briefly framed in my red taillights before they vanished. My heart thumped once, hard. I reached for rational answers the way you reach for the dash in a skid. Maybe I'd looped somehow. Taken a fork without noticing. Highways out here can be weird. Overlapping routes, signed spurs, old alignments that peel off and then rejoin. I glanced at the GPS mounted on the dash. My little arrow crawled along a straight line where the device labeled the road with a bland number. No intersections behind. No alternative paths. Just one lonely route pressing east. The clock said 1:22. Desert's messing with you, I muttered aloud. Sometimes saying it helps. Names the ghost, knocks it down to size. I told myself it was a prank, maybe. Someone swapping marker plates for a laugh. Or that Nevada DOT had some weird reason to reuse numbers on different segments. They do strange things with mileposts out here. Half-mile designations, fractional plates for bridges. I clung to that. Then the gas light came on. That soft, amber icon might as well have been a gunshot. My stomach dropped. The gauge hovered just above empty now. It shouldn't have been that low yet. The math in my head said I still had more than enough range. But tanks don't care about your math. They care about distance actually driven. And that was the problem, wasn't it? I wasn't sure anymore how much distance I'd actually covered. Miles unspooled under the tires. The road did what desert roads do. Straight for a long time, then a gentle bend around a shallow rise, then straight again. Each time I crested a small hill and looked back for headlights. There were none. No oncoming traffic. No companions in either direction. Just the twin beams of my own car and the enormous, indifferent sky. Mile marker 18 showed up where it shouldn't have. By then, seeing it again felt like being mocked. Same number, same lean of the post. For a moment, pure, irrational anger burned through the fear. Fine, I snapped at it as I passed. Be 18, be whatever you want. My voice sounded too loud in the cabin, too small against the void. The weirdest part, there wasn't the repetition. It was the way time refused to match it. My dash clock climbed steadily, 1:30, 1:37, 1:45. Each pass of that same marker, 8 real minutes. The gas gauge continued to sink. Whatever was happening wasn't me dozing off and jolting awake in the same spot. I was moving. Fuel was burning. The odometer ticked up. And yet, somehow, the road ahead kept offering me the same damned mile. I tried turning the stereo on just to break the spell. Static. A few snatches of AM voices from nowhere in particular. I shut it off again. The noise made it worse. It felt like the world was thinning down to a narrow equation. Me, the car, the stretch between marker 19 and marker 18, repeated over and over until either the tank went dry or my mind did. At some point, the air changed. You notice subtle things after hours alone like that. The temperature on my skin cooled despite the heater staying where it was. The smell through the vents shifted from hot dust to something cleaner, almost metallic, like the air before a storm, even though the sky above was brutally clear. The stars at the horizon seemed to bunch together, warping slightly, as if the curvature of the earth had flexed. The next sign I saw was not a mile marker. It was green, bigger, the kind that lists towns and distances. I remember the names, though I won't repeat them here. 3 places, all east of where I'd turned off. The mileage under each was wrong. Too big. According to that sign, I was further from my destination than when I'd left the main highway. That's not possible, I whispered. But the road doesn't deal in what's possible. It only deals in where you are. The fuel light began to blink now, a polite, insistent metronome of doom. There was no shoulder worth pulling onto, just a narrow strip of gravel and then soft sand that could swallow a car to its axles. I pictured myself stranded out there, hood up, phone dead, the desert's cold sinking in after the engine went quiet. People vanish like that in Nevada every year. Cars found abandoned, footprints leading a little way into the brush, then gone. They call in search and rescue, and sometimes they find bones months later. Sometimes they don't. That's when the idea finally formed, slow and heavy. Maybe the only way out was to break the pattern. I'd been obediently following the lane, trusting the rules of the road even as they betrayed me. What if this little pocket of nowhere, this loop of 18 to 19, only existed as long as I stayed inside the lines? The thought was stupid, dangerous, magical thinking. It was also the only thought that felt new after an hour of circling the same invisible drain. So I did the one thing you are absolutely not supposed to do in a place like that. I stopped. Not a gentle coast. A full, tire-screeching stand on the brake in the middle of the lane. The car lurched, ABS chattering, seatbelt biting into my chest. For a second, I braced for impact from behind that never came. Of course it didn't. There was no one else out there. I put the car in park, turned on the hazards. The red blinkers lit up the sagebrush in jerky pulses. My breath came fast and shallow. My hands shook on the wheel. I sat there, listening. The desert has a sound when you're moving. When you're not, it has another. A deep, almost inaudible hum, like the world's own blood in your ears. In that hum, I thought I could hear a pattern, not words exactly. More like the rise and fall of something counting, measuring, ticking off units of what? Cars? People? Mile markers? I don't know how long I stayed like that. A minute, 10. Time inside the car felt as unreliable as distance outside it. Eventually, the gaslight gave a petulant blink and went solid again, reminding me that my little protest had a firm deadline. I took one more breath that felt like it scraped my lungs and put the car back in drive. Okay, I said to nothing. Okay, let's try this again. I eased forward. But this time, when the faint shape of the next milepost emerged from the darkness, I didn't look away. I watched it approach, every foot of its journey into the beams. White numbers on green, crisp and implacable. 17. Not 18. Not 19. 17. The rush of relief was so sharp it hurt. I laughed once, a wild, broken sound. The fuel light stayed on, but I was finally, undeniably shaving miles off the distance to whatever passed for safety. My GPS blinked, screen flickering, then reluctantly updated my position, with a little hop eastward. For the first time in what felt like hours, something in the universe agreed that I had moved. I caught the glow of town long before I reached it, a low, dirty halo on the horizon, a gas station, a couple of sodium lights, maybe a diner. Civilization in miniature. I limped in on fumes, the engine coughing once as I rolled up to the pump. When I stepped out, my legs didn't feel like they belonged to me. The air was bitingly cold, but it was ordinary cold now. Not that strange, breathless chill of the loop. Inside, the only person on duty was a kid in his 20s, half watching something on his phone behind the counter. I filled the tank to the brim, more money than I meant to spend, and went in to pay. As he rang me up, I asked, as casually as I could, if the mile markers out on that state route ever got messed with. He shrugged. They move 'em sometimes when they straighten the road or remeasure, he said. Folks say the miles out there don't feel right anyway. Everything's farther than it looks. He slid me the receipt. You coming from 50? Yeah. Don't drive that at night if you can help it. He said it like he was repeating advice he'd grown up hearing. His eyes flicked past me, out toward the dark. People get turned around, run out of gas. Desert's bigger than it looks on the map. I slept in that town a few hours, then finished the trip in harsh, honest daylight. I went back once, months later, in full sun, to see if the stretch between 19 and 18 made any more sense with the world lit up. It looked like any other piece of empty two-lane. Cracked shoulders, scattered brush, the occasional cow path trailing off into nothing. The mile markers stood where they should, numbers in correct order, distance behaving itself. I drove it without incident. No loops, no missing minutes. Maybe that night was just exhaustion and nerves. My brain misreading or skipping posts, the fuel gauge sagging faster in my imagination than in reality. Maybe. But if you ever find yourself out there in the Nevada dark, on some stretch of the loneliest road or one of its even lonelier cousins, and your sense of progress starts to slip. If the numbers on the signs don't seem to match the time in your head, if the next town refuses to get any closer, no matter how long you drive, do one thing for me. Stop. Just for a moment, in a place that's as safe as you can make it. Feel the weight of the car settle into the pavement. Listen to the desert hum. Let the road know you're not afraid to get off its conveyor belt, even briefly. Then, when you're sure of which direction your heart is beating, pick a point on the horizon that isn't a mile marker and drive toward that instead. Because some miles out there aren't measuring distance the way you think they are. And not every stretch of empty blacktop is interested in letting you reach the end.